Now, I had a fascinating conversation with some people on Friday night as the sun was almost coming up. Yeah, it was one of those nights. It was a fun night. Well, we were talking about tax, and I've had some conversations with people over the past couple of weeks who believe that things like a higher GST and lower income tax would obviously be better because the less tax you pay as an individual, the more tax you pay, depending on how much you spend and the amount that you spend on the things that you spend, could start to balance the books. But everyone, when I have this conversation, regardless of how informed or just guessing they might be about the tax system, is always surprised because this is how unbalanced our system has become. The individual is responsible for a huge amount of the tax that becomes the revenue for the government. There is only a fraction that comes from companies, all the way from the multi-billion-dollar corporations and banks. And then, of course, there's the GST. Now, remember, the GST is not how the federal government funds itself, but the taxes that were gotten rid of under tax reform under John Howard from the states, meaning that the GST replaced that revenue and every dollar of GST money gets divvied up and sent back to the states. But have a look at just how unbalanced the system is. Now, again, those who talk about tax reform, we need to understand not just the size of the pie, but how big the personal income slice is of the pie. According to MyEFO, which doubles down on the numbers from the budget last year, $350 billion comes from the average worker. $144 billion comes from the companies of this country, big and small. And GST is under $100 billion. So while I leave that up on the screen, I want people to understand that even if you doubled the GST to 20%, presumably that number, well, it doesn't go much higher than a little more than what's got in company tax. Now, companies will always argue that their tax should be lower. Why? Because they can reinvest, but many companies are listed on the stock exchange, which means they produce a dividend, and that is what they like to pay back, more so than money to the country via company tax. But it is very, very poorly balanced when obviously there are millions and millions of workers as opposed to, thousands and thousands of companies. But that's the size of the pie, 357 versus 95 billion. And of course, the government has a problem because it is in a world of pain. It has promised us that there will be at least 10 more budget deficits, and their expectations of the next 40 years is that every year we'll have a budget deficit. Now, of course, will there be some spikes and some accidental surpluses and here and there? Sure. But structurally, the federal government plans to spend more than it takes in. No matter how big the population, no matter how large the company, or no matter how much you spend on things that are charged by the GST. So interestingly, there is a conversation being had about how do we rebalance the system. Now, obviously, the government would like to pretend that they are saving money, but they introduce new spending, billions and billions each and every election, big new bureaucracies moving through to things probably that'll either be a core promise or beginning to be delivered before the next election, of things like free childcare, let alone the NDIS, the pension and all the rest of it. Treasurer Jim Chalmers is being urged by the International Monetary Fund, not unserious people, to use the May budget to embrace far-reaching tax reform, an increase in the GST, overhauling capital gains tax, cutting company tax to lift standards and get the economy growing faster. Can we go back to that slide about the division of taxes? Now, again, I'm pro-business. I like the idea of small companies paying less tax because it is so burdensome. But even if the GST went up by double and company tax goes, down by 10%, you're essentially washing the same dollar amount. You're just getting it from different areas. But the actual area that would unlock more money in more people's pockets is, of course, personal income tax.